Okay, so today is actually a video of three parts. Now, the reason for that is that right now, the UK, through the media and through YouTube and the news and everything else, whether it's mainstream or independent, it seems to be living through three stories. Well, in actual fact, three and a half stories. We'll get to the half at the end. But they don't sound like they belong together. But in actual fact, they probably are more linked than you realize. So we've got everything from a US president threatening a billion dollar lawsuit over a BBC sort of recut from a speech that he made. There have been breathless online claims of a military coup, and that the military are going to basically sort of unseat the UK government. And then there's also now a reignited row about national digital identification. And there's been a little bit of backpedaling on that. But they're all connected by one thing. So they seem like they're entirely separate, but they are connected by one thing. And that one thing is us, the public, scrambling to know where the truth lies. What's dangerous, and also more importantly, who. And also who, if anybody's going to pay. So let's cut through the noise. I want to get into it. So, for story number one, Donald Trump versus the BBC. So basically, the claim, the law, and also the risk to us, the taxpayer in the UK. So basically, Donald Trump's lawyers have threatened legal action, claiming that the BBC's Panorama programme edited his speech that he gave, I believe it was January the 6th. And yeah, that basically misrepresented him in quite a bad light. And to be fair, it was an absolute hatchet job. They've put forward minimum damages in the form of a demand for $1 billion. And the dispute has obviously triggered high profile fallout inside the BBC. I believe that two senior executives so far, including the head of the BBC, have actually resigned. And the BBC is allegedly reviewing the matter. So, first things first, does the legal claim actually have any teeth? Well, there are two big hurdles for Donald Trump on this one. So the first one, as far as I see it, and I'm not obviously a lawyer, but the first one is going to be jurisdiction, because obviously, the rules in the US that he's actually invoking are obviously going to be different to the UK, where we've got defamation laws that work for our Bill of Rights, if you like, and our system, and the US has got their own defamation laws. They do work differently. So several legal commentators, I think, including black belt barrister, who we share nothing but a similar haircut, they have said that there probably is grounds for some kind of lawsuit. I think he believes that the BBC are likely to settle with maybe a tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of pounds figure. But there are some legal tripwires that Donald Trump is going to need to navigate. And there are also evidential problems that he faces at the moment. And there are other commentators that have warned about powerful litigants that are basically using threats to force a settlement. So, from a subjective point of view, we should worry about this. And it's not just because the BBC is funded by the taxpayer, but the BBC is actually funded under a royal charter through the TV license. It's a public broadcaster, not a private profit-making news startup. So very large damages, whether it's an award or a settlement, it raises the question, where's this money going to come from? Well, the answer is obvious. The money is going to come from the license payer. Now, I don't do TV license. I've got Netflix, I've got Prime, I've got YouTube, I'm good. But this is it. So any bill that's due, any award, any settlement is literally going to get tacked on to the millions of people in the UK that still do pay a TV license. Their costs are going to spiral. And it could go up quite dramatically. I mean, usually it goes up about £4 or £5 every couple of years. This could see the biggest jump in a long, long time. It could push it well over £200. which means at the moment it's about £175 for a TV license. In order to get this award, if you like, or settlement paid, it could go up to about 205. There could be a £30 increase because of something that some numpty at the BBC did. So basically, those who pay the licenses are going to foot the bill for oversight within an organisation that, to be honest, many people don't agree should even exist anymore. Obviously, the BBC has reserves and it has insurance for things like legal risks. That's without question. But if this is a prolonged or a sustained claim that takes a long time to settle, those resources could very well be stretched. And then there's political pressure that comes into play over licensing funding for future government support. So that's why commentators at the moment seem to be discussing, I guess you'd call it, political optics. A foreign leader's lawsuit leading to a public broadcaster paying a huge sum of money out would be politically explosive. So the bottom line is that it's not a done deal, but many legal experts are basically saying that the case could be hard to win in the US. The BBC's got their insurance, they've got a few other sneaky defences in regards to defamation law, maybe a get-out clause. But the political damage and the prospect of an expensive legal fight can't be denied. And it means that the public finances and the BBC's budget are now a legitimate part of the conversation, and also how they continue to be funded by and squander the license fees that they get. Because, it's not like taxpayers are going to be willing to automatically write a check. But public funding, political oversight, and all of these things, they are basically part of how the BBC operates, along with, as we now see, hopefully, bias, which is something that no national news organisation should do. This has basically exposed the BBC as a propaganda machine, a left-wing propaganda machine. So that's the first part. Now, the second part, and this was a video. In fact, after this, I watched a chain of videos. The algorithm got me. Basically, a video came up in my feed of a possible military coup regarding the UK government. So let's go into what's actually happened. So basically, in the last 24 to 48 hours, there have been a few stories, mainly from military commentators, about an alleged coup to remove the Prime Minister and with him, his government. There are also names like Wes Streeting that are appearing in the coverage as a possible successor, and also in online speculation. Now, Downing Street and the Prime Minister, Starmer, has publicly pushed back on this. There have been some senior figures that have come out and denied plotting to oust him, including, I believe, Ed Miliband. Dear God. While other reports describe a vicious briefing war and an internal leak that's caused this. The mainstream press basically frames this as an internal leadership row with messy political infighting, not a military takeover. However, what does a coup actually mean? So a coup is short for coup d'etat. By, I guess, standard definitions, it's a sudden overthrow of a government. Now, typically, this is done by elements of armed forces or even private security services in some cases. For example, Cuba had a military coup. Various African countries have had coups. So it's not done through normal parliamentary politics. Basically, Britannica and other academic sources emphasize that a coup involves control of military or police instruments of power, and it is usually violent, or at the very least, it's coercive. So the situation being reported in the UK is not that. It's about political briefings. It's about leadership challenge mechanics and possible internal party manoeuvres. So I don't know if maybe the people that put the videos out have either got some serious inside track into military, plans or manoeuvres, or if they've just misunderstood the context and the meaning of the word coup. And they're thinking a military coup, whereas this is going to be just an internal kind of, you know, party screwing over another party member coup. But this is how leadership challenges can work in Britain. In parliamentary systems, leaders are removed by internal party rules, by parliamentary votes, by resignation, or indeed, we hope, at general elections, not by the military. The Labour Party has its own rules for how a leader can be challenged, and the mechanics are political and they are procedural. For example, there is a certain threshold of MPs that need to support a challenger. I believe it's something like 30% or something like that, which for Labour right now would be about 80, 81, 82 seats or something like that. So when people online use the word coup, I think the people that made these videos maybe misunderstood that in this instance, perhaps it was being used metaphorically, just meaning a plot to remove a leader, not literally that the army are going to come in, guns blazing, helicopters whirring, and, you know, sort of extradite Keir Starmer from Parliament. But anyway, either way, so Number 10 has tried to publicly warn off plotters to stabilise the story, to firefight the news. But in real terms, the most likely outcomes here are political. They're going to be things like resignations, reshuffles, leadership contests, maybe, not an armed takeover. So the bottom line for, I guess, anybody watching this is that, you know, any panic that you see online about a military coup, I'm pretty sure that this is misplaced. This is basically about political infighting, not soldiers in the streets. And we're not going to suddenly relive 1960s South America. The fallout absolutely still matters. It still affects policy delivery. It still affects public mood. It still affects sentiment. It still probably affects our income. And it's the kind of story that can quickly escalate in the press and the social media if it does turn into a crisis. So that was part two. Part three, digital ID. Now, I've done a couple of videos on digital ID, how I believe it's going to be awful and everything else. We've all got opinions on it, and there are fors and there are againsts and all the rest of it. So the official government pages say now that the scheme will be rolled out and will be mandatory for right-to-work checks by the end of the Parliament, 2029. While other uses, such as the gov.uk wallet for storing documents, these are now being described as optional. Now, that wasn't the case before, but that distinction, mandatory for specific legal checks, optional for general use, is now very much central to debate. So, whereby it was, you will do this is now a thing, and the public, 6 million plus of us, said hell no. I believe now that they've backpedaled, they've lost a bit of credibility. If they'd come out with a statement that it's mandatory for this, optional for this to start with, there probably would have been a bit less resistance. And it does seem now that they've kind of, a month, 2 months down the line, finally read the room and said, look, public sentiment, it's going to be another poll tax revolt kind of thing. Let's not do this. So they've now adapted it in the same way that they did a manifesto to get into government, and now that manifesto seems to be changing almost monthly. They are backpedaling now over digital IDs. So, yeah, I think they're going to lose the battle on this one. I really do. I really hope they do as well. And this is basically not a good thing, because it means there's confusion, and with that comes panic. You're going to get people that are social posting that don't really know what they're talking about. You're going to get people like me that make videos like this, that it might enrage people, it might inflame people, people might not care, whatever. But you're going to get people that are making content. There are social posts that I've seen already. There are videos that I've seen already where people have taken a speech that he made about a private company charging £85 to verify somebody's ID. I believe it was to get a mortgage or a loan or something like that. And it's been blown out of context. And people have taken this ball and they've run with it. And now they've said that if you don't use it, when you need to do a check, Keir Starmer's going to charge you £85. That's not the case. And as much as I don't want digital IDs to come in, you can't just go making figures up because of some social post that a single mum in Huddersfield has put out or something like that. It just doesn't work. So these claims, they have been debunked already by Reuters Fact Check. I think a few others have now jumped on the bandwagon. But basically, the fact check shows that Starmer did not say that people would be charged £85 every time. He was describing a private experience where somebody else had paid a private provider for a private verification. Now, maybe that's a new hustle that I can get into because that sounds fantastic. But it's not a state fee. And the government's line has always been that the digital ID will be mandatory where the law requires proof of status. That's the way that I see it, the way that I've read it. And based on the speeches that have been given, it still very much does apply to right to work checks, not a universal mandatory app forced on every citizen for every interaction yet. And that's the important delimiter, yet. So, what does optional look like in practice? Well, the UK, I guess, blockchain wallet, the gov.uk wallet. This is the practical app, the wallet element of the program. It's been described as optional for users to hold their credentials. But ministers, they are explicit that for certain legal checks, like an employer checking a person's right to work, the digital route will be the standard and it will be an enforceable mechanism. But there still will need to be other safeguards and transition arrangements. But the practical effect basically is that if you need to prove your right to work, employers, legal employers, will now likely have to use the verifiable digital route. So there will be, hopefully, some full fact checking going on in Parliament briefings that can explain this nuance perhaps a little bit better. But the headline, digital ID is mandatory for everyone, is wrong at the time that this video is made. The correct headline is probably a bit more complex because the government is creating a digital identity system that will be optional to carry for most interactions, but mandatory for specific legal checks, mainly for the right to work. And that distinction is basically what's inflamed public debate and also fueled a lot of misinformation. So, what does this mean for all of us? Now, well, in regards to Trump versus the BBC, it's a big political story with huge legal questions. The legal merits look a little bit shaky to many experts, but the political fallout could be huge, not just for Trump, but also for the UK, because the BBC is publicly funded. So questions about who pays are massively, it's a political toxic potato. That's why people worry about taxpayers even being on the hook for this, even if direct payment by the UK government is not automatic. Why should we fit the bill? The Starmer coup rumours, I would just ignore the word coup. What people mean is leadership challenge. That's probably a more sensible way to phrase it. A military coup is extraordinarily unlikely in the UK. This is internal politics, not an armed seizure of power. Political instability at the top, though, in this way, it's going to make the government rattled. And also it can still harm, governance in the UK, and also it can harm our markets. Like, for example, the FTSE. It's probably going to take a bit of a kicking if there is a leadership challenge. And then digital ID. The government's plan, I guess, has become over time more nuanced. And it does feel that they're kind of learning on the job, which is not the way that this needs to go. There should have been a plan and a roadmap fully in place before this was even announced. It's almost like there's an internship going on in the government at the moment between Reeves, Starmer, and Lammy about, on the job training or something like that. It seems ridiculous. But basically, people are still up in arms about this. There is a lot of scaremongering about it. I've gone by sources like Reuters who do fact checks. Also, what they've put on their own government website. I mean, the information is all up there. You just need to be able to sort of access it and read it, I guess. But if you care about your privacy, do keep watching for updates on the technical details and also, most importantly, the oversight arrangements for this. Because these are the bits that matter, really. They are the bits that matter. So I did also mention there was a point five. The point five is the Prince Andrew and Epstein scandal, however you want to pronounce his name. I mean, this has been going on for years now. I think we all know what happened, or we've all got an inkling as to what happened. I don't want to just come out and say it, but all I say is not my prince. I'll leave that there. So look, YouTube's going to put another video there. Like, follow, subscribe, ring the bell, all that jazz, and there will be another video tomorrow. Goldman, peace out.